Shalom, this is Shira Sherbow coming to you from Sfat, Israel. Tonight we have several people that we're praying for and dedicating this Torah time to their healing. So we're praying for Benjamin, the son of Daphne, and Zevi, the son of Miriam Esther, and Nahama, the son of Miriam Esther, and Valentina, the daughter of Rosa. So we'll dedicate our Torah learning to their quick recovery. You know, it's always funny to try to come up with a title for what we're going to talk about. And I called this Captain Obvious, which is so weird because we're living in a time when absolutely nothing is, everything is so many unknowns. So, you know, I thought, well, we could call this March Madness or take the red pill. I was thinking of the movie The Matrix when he has a choice to take the blue pill or the red pill. And if you take the blue pill, everything just goes on as usual. And if you take the red pill, you get like a real reality check. And it seems like whether we wanted to or not, we all woke up with the red pill and we're like, whoa, what happened? Like this is a new reality for us. I hear a lot of people talking about how, you know, we're not in the driver's seat. We're not at the one in control. God is telling us, He's showing us in one easy lesson how we think we're in control and then all of a sudden we're not. He's in control. So the way that I got this title of Captain Obvious was that earlier this week, someone had sent me something of the Pope. He was on 60 Minutes recently, and he was talking about the Jewish Sabbath. And he was saying how important it is, you know, emotionally, physically, spiritually, to have a day of rest, how important it is for the family, like we just go, we're not resting. And, but he was saying just a very positive things about the Jewish Sabbath and how the Jews keep the Sabbath. And so I sent it to my kids, and my son, one of my sons, he had a funny statement. He's like, oh, Captain Obvious, you know. And it just struck me funny because it's like, to my kids now, keeping the Sabbath is obvious. The Jewish Sabbath is obvious because of everything they've been through with me. It's obvious, and it's more and more obvious to a lot of people. But it made me think about how, boy, when I was growing up and I read the Bible for the first time and I had questions, there was nothing, absolutely nothing obvious about the Sabbath. And so I thought, well, here we are in 2020, and you know, they always say hindsight is 2020, or we have this idea of the Monday morning quarterback, you know, like I just feel like as we get farther and farther in history, the things that were so hard for like my generation, like we had to really figure this out on our own, because everyone around us was telling us that the Sabbath was a Sunday. And so I remember being in 6th grade. I'm going to tell you a little bit of my journey with the Sabbath, because this week in our Torah portion, like we always talk about how our Torah portion of the week is so relevant to what is going on in the world. And, you know, the world just kind of shutting down, especially like Israel. You know, this was the first Sabbath where there's absolutely nothing open, no buses running, nothing. And so it's really neat in a way, because there's some people that take the Sabbath very, very seriously and follow all the rules, and then other people not so much. And it kind of reminds me of when you go to the gym and then you have your very serious people that are really into working out, and then you have your kind of not so much. And that goes on here too with keeping the Sabbath at different levels. So our Torah portion this week is about God talking to the people about keeping the Sabbath. And so this is kind of in the air, and I wanted to talk about my 6th grade year. Just stands out in my mind. Well, one of the things was, it was the very first time that I ever picked up a Bible and was reading it. And what had happened was there was some college students from Abilene Christian University that came up to Rome, New York, where we lived, on their spring break, and they were going door knocking and asking people if they wanted to study the Bible. And I was thinking about it. I thought, well, okay, my brother was 16, so he was off, doing his thing. My two little sisters were like 9 and 7, so they were too young, but I was 12. And so it seemed like it just was like I was at the right age. It was like me and mom having these Bible studies. Neither one of us had ever read the Bible before. Even though I went to Catholic school, we learned Catholic things, but we didn't read the Bible. And so they asked my mother if she wanted to read the Bible, and she said she did, and I ended up reading it too and having Bible studies. And it turned out that we met some people. Mostly everybody in my world that I knew from school and everything was Catholic. And when my mother made some friends that weren't Catholic, and so the minister at the church had 5 kids, and his oldest daughter was my age, so I would spend the night over there a lot. And so the very first time that I read the Bible, I got to the second chapter, like the first line in the second chapter, and I had a question. So this is what I read. It said, on the 7th day, God completed his work that he had made. On the 7th day, he rested from all his work that he had done. So, I'm 12 years old. I was selling Girl Scout cookies that year, vice president of my 6th grade class, a little cheerleader for our basketball team. Just life is just like really good and la la la. And I'm reading the Bible for the first time, and I'm spending the night at my friend's house, and her dad's the minister. And I said, so, how come everything's closed on Sunday? I'm just a little 12-year-old kid, and I said, it says God rested on the 7th day. And I just know that if you're my age, you know that you didn't get to go roller skating, you couldn't go to the mall, you didn't go bowling, you didn't go putt-putt, you couldn't, everything was closed except one little grocery store, usually one little gas station. And that was the big thing that you got to do on Sunday. You went to church, and you went and bought some candy and Coke at the one little gas station that was open. And that was Sunday, and everybody... in my generation, it was like Sunday is the Sabbath. Sunday is the day you go to church. And so I just asked him, well, it seems like we should be going to church on Saturday. And so he tried to explain to me, and he said, well, that was then. That's the Old Testament. But now we're not under the law. We're not. That was then. This is now, and now is Sunday, basically. And I remember thinking, well, I don't know why, like, he's like, do you get it? Do you understand? And I remember going like, no. Like, did somebody get up and make an announcement? Like, if you've always gone on Saturday, like, does somebody just get up one day and go, okay, we're now at Sunday? Like, how did this happen? And I just remember never really understanding what he was saying, and it bothered me that I thought, well, why can't it just be simple? Like, why can't you say God rested on the 7th day, and we all rest on the 7th day, and what, who complicated this, And so it wasn't until I got to my 40s. At this time, I'm married with 6 kids, living in Abilene, Texas, and I'm flipping through the stations on the TV, and there's a Channel 17, it was called God's Learning Channel. And there was a guy on there, and he was talking about the Sabbath, and he was saying that the Sabbath was Saturday. And I remember, like, well, that was my Captain Obvious moment. It's like, that was obvious to me when I was 12 years old. Like, now we're just coming out with this, like, anyways, you know how it is, like, when you find out one thing, it just kind of goes from there. Like, certainly, shortly after that, there was this video going around about Christmas and about Easter, and it just seemed like my whole world started just going, like I was questioning everything. Like, Christmas is a pagan holiday, and Easter is a pagan holiday, and we have the wrong Sabbath, and it just kept going and going and going. And I think y'all, if you're listening to me, you know what this is like. And so it's like, and if you go to talk to anybody about it, it would never turn out good. It never was, to me, it was never like a normal conversation. It was always just like, I can't believe you're questioning this. And I so there was one pastor that I went to. He was a really sweet guy, a sweet family. And I went to him several times to talk about the Sabbath. And on the third meeting, every time I felt bad, I was taking up all his time, and he was just didn't understand why I was having such a problem with the Sabbath. And so finally, on their third meeting, he said, okay, I know the Sabbath is Saturday. He goes, if you want to keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath. He said, but we come to church on Sunday. Everybody's used to coming to church on Sunday. I'm not going to get up and make an announcement to the church that, we're going to start coming on Saturday. Everybody's always already used to Sunday. Sunday is our day off. Sunday is our day of rest. And he goes, look at all the good things that happen in our church. And look at all the fruit. And I remember that was like the last thing we said. I left there going, okay, I see a lot of fruit, I see a lot of good things happening in church. I couldn't deny that. There's always people doing kindnesses for other people at church. There's always, praying for the sick, visiting the sick, helping the poor, marriage counseling, parenting classes. I don't know, all kinds of services that the church provides. And so it's like, and so he goes, what are you saying? Like, what is your problem with the Sabbath? Why are you making a big deal out of this? Like, look at all the fruit. So I remember leaving there, and a couple days later, I remember the exact place I was when I was vacuuming, and all of a sudden, I just had this thought, just about look at all the fruit. And I pictured a husband and a wife, and the wife goes and has relations with somebody else that's not her husband, and she gets pregnant, she has a baby, and then she brings the baby to her husband, and she says, look at the fruit. And her husband is just like speechless, like, what? Seriously? And that's what came to my mind. Like, okay, I understand what you're saying about the fruit, but a prostitute can create fruit. So is it really about the fruit, or is it about the relationship of the two? And so we just last week we talked about the golden calf, and it was like that same idea, like the people thinking that they were doing the right thing, and they thinking, okay, Moses has died, and we need to replace Moses, and so I'm told that Moses is Old Testament and the New Testament has replaced Moses, and so you just kind of get off on this wrong little way of thinking, and you think that you're doing fruit for God, you're making fruit, and he's just like, he was very, of course, obviously upset about the golden calf. And then he gives them, I don't know, it's like a love story this week in the Torah portion, because I don't know if you've ever, probably had been in love with somebody, and then you had this fight, and you think that it's over, and then you make up, and then it's wonderful again. And it's kind of like that's what's in the air with this Torah portion. There was this, God was so upset with them and the golden calf and Moses pleading, and so then this week they come back together again. And God's telling them that he wants them to keep the Sabbath, and he also wants them to build him a tent, a tabernacle. And so something keeps happening with my phone. Anyway, it's a beautiful, like, break up to make up kind of a story this week. And I think, that's really in the air with all of us. I mean, we're all kind of looking at ourselves and looking at our relationship with God, and everything has come to a standstill, and just like looking inside, introspective time for everything. And so I thought, it was so neat that God asked them to do something for him, because when you ask somebody, if you're fighting, you're saying, I don't want anything from you, stay away from me. But when you come back together and you say, can you do something for me? All of a sudden that person would only ask you to do something for them if they wanted to have a relationship with you. And so the relationship was back on. and they couldn't do it fast enough, and they couldn't do it with all their heart. They were like, whatever you want, yes, we want to get back together. And so that's what's in the Torah portion this week, this keeping the Sabbath. So I remember going back to this time in my life that I realized that the Sabbath was Saturday. And shortly after that, I realized that it really was Friday night. And so it was just this progression of it starts Friday night at sundown. And then I was working on Saturday, so I quit working on Saturday. But I would still go out to garage sales, and I would still go out to sporting events. And so then I learned a little bit more about the Sabbath. Well, you're not supposed to spend money on the Sabbath. And so I kept thinking for a long time that I was keeping the Sabbath, and I was to the best of my ability. But I was really, looking back now, I didn't have really a clue of. I knew it was, more than just a day off, and that it was supposed to be a day spent with God. And anyway, it kind of came on me slowly. But it wasn't until very recently, just moving here to Sfat, to an Orthodox Jewish community, that I realized what it really means to keep Shabbat. It's not just, this is the day of rest, this is the day I have off from work. This is a funny thought that I had, but you know how you do like line dances with people, like the Macarena, everybody's doing the same thing, and it's like the Shabbat. When I moved to this neighborhood, it's like the Shabbat is something that we all have to do together and have the same definitions for everything. Like from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, we all have to be in sync, or it doesn't work. Like if you're doing a line dance and somebody comes along and says, well, my Shabbat is like this, and my Shabbat is like, it doesn't work. Like that's just freestyle dancing. But if you're gonna keep the Shabbat in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, it's like there are people in their 60s and 70s that go to class still to learn how to keep the Shabbat. Like it's a lifelong learning and perfecting what exactly is considered what you can do and what you can't do, and so that everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same definition of work and what it means. And this is the first time that I didn't know, my whole life I didn't know about the written Torah and the oral Torah. Because you can read in the Bible that I was told was the Old Testament, but you can read something that says keep the Shabbat or rest on the Shabbat, and it's not until you get somebody, just like if you read do the Macarena, well, how would you know how to do it? So that's where the oral Torah comes in. That's where you have the person showing you, here's what I mean, here's how you do it. And so you just learn from your mother, you learn from classes, you learn, every generation passes to the next generation orally, because all you're going to get in the written Torah is keep the Shabbat, or remember the Shabbat, and keep it holy. And so it's like, okay, but what does that mean? And we all have to know, we all have to be on the same page. And so that's one of the reasons that you'll never see Jewish people going around like the missionaries that came to our house and they wanted to study the Bible with us. The idea was that we would join their church. But a Jewish person's never going to tell a non-Jewish person to become Jewish. Because if you're Jewish, you're supposed to keep the Shabbat in a very, very, very strict way. And you can definitely have a relationship with God without doing all these rules. And they would never put that on somebody or make somebody think that you had to do this. This is just something, so this is happening in the Torah portion this week where the people are being told to keep the Shabbat, the seventh day, and they're being told exactly what that means, and then they're being told to, of course they're going to pass this down to their children for every generation. And so the Shabbat is when I had my first computer and my iPad, and I would start Googling about it, and when I found out that millions of Jews went to their death because Christians would come around and say, the Shabbat is Sunday, and if you don't believe the Shabbat, in Europe, that Christianity was different than it is in the United States. In Europe, it was like the government and the church was all the same. So if the church decided that you had to believe that the Shabbat was Sunday, they could come to your house, the government could come to your house and, take your property, throw you in jail, make you comply with all their rules. And so if you're Jewish and the government's telling you you cannot have off on Saturday and Sunday is the new Sabbath, you would just be like, what in the world? Like, this is what my family's been doing since Mount Sinai. Like, how can you come? How can the government all of a sudden come and tell me that the Shabbat's Sunday? The Shabbat's not Sunday. And so here now we are in 2020, and my kid's going like, oh, obvious, Captain Obvious. We all know that, we all know Shabbat's like, well, for 2,000 years it wasn't obvious. People went to their death over it. And so I just wonder, like, this time last year, I started doing a series on recognize and know. And because we read in our prayers every day that says, one day every single creature that walks the earth is going to recognize and know the one true God. And so I see it happening. I see like things that were so hidden and things that I had to like work so hard and to talk to so many people and try to figure out what was true, what all of a sudden people are going, like, we all know that. We all know the Sabbath never changed, We all know it's Friday night to Saturday. And it's like just one thing after the other. We all know Christmas is a pagan holiday. We all know, like, who doesn't know this, And so it's just like, okay, well, at the time I was finding all this stuff out like nothing. But now it's more and more obvious. And that's because more and more light, as we keep the Sabbath, it says that's what brings God's reality into the world. And I was listening to Chaim Richman, and he was I'm going to read you what he said, that when we read on the Sabbath in Genesis 2, that part that I read you, that's what we recite over the wine. We say, thus heaven and earth were finished in all their array. By the seventh day God completed the work he had done. He abstained on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it he abstained from all his work which God created to make. So he said, whoever prays and recites these words is made a partner in the creation of heaven and earth. And this is what I love. That's how we create. By testifying that God is the creator. On the Holy Shabbat, his highest light shines forth into each and every one according to his level. And so as we keep the true Shabbat, the Shabbat that God wants us to keep, that says, he rested on the seventh day, this is what points people to the one true God. This is what keeps people from going off and making fruit with somebody that's not the true God, that's saying that's the Shabbat and are supposed to be the light to the nations. And so when people look and they see who is keeping the Shabbat, who's keeping the truth, these are the people that were assigned for all time to be the teachers. And it changed my life when I started learning about God from a Jewish teacher. And I feel like I finally got adjusted to, okay, the Jews the designated. Of course, yes, we know that it's not the way it's been for 2,000 years, when people would actually go to their death for not complying that Sunday was the new Shabbat, and many other things besides that. But it's all coming around. No, it's not the Old Testament. No, it's the Torah. We know it's his word forever. We know the Jews have never been replaced by the church or anybody else. That this week, actually, in the Torah portion, just kind of sealed the deal between the Jewish people and God, because they had done the terrible sin of the golden calf, and then they made up, and they got back together. and it was like sealed. Like, I have forgiven you. You have repented. We're on again. We're good. And it's like, no matter how many times we get it wrong, we know it's on Him. Like, He's the one that's going to, like, no matter how long you take, you're my people, eternal people. So, all right. Well, that's why we're calling this week Captain Obvious, when absolutely nothing in the world seems obvious right now. But we know Sabbath is obvious, that it is, was, and always will. So